Hello and welcome to episode 24 of the Books to Last podcast. As mentioned in my little announcement last week, this week's guest is Pablo Suarez. We had an awesome time talking about lots of really epic fantasy books and just a lovely chat with a lovely person, and I hope you enjoy. Pablo, welcome to Books to Last podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing brilliant. Thank you very much. I've had a very chill Saturday.
Always good. What are you reading at the minute? Anything particularly exciting?
Right now, I am trying something out because I've been, I don't know about you, but I'm a very moody, sort of mood reader.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah. And I can go into like very long, extended reading slumps. So I'm trying something out, which is a bit redundant, but it's working out so far, which is I take a book and then I also get the audiobook for that book. And it's sort of like it boosts me through the reading. So right now I'm reading Trudy Cavani's The Black Magician. I don't know if you are familiar with the series.
I haven't heard of that, but I'm
Um,
intrigued because it's got magician in the
yeah,
title. So
it's a fairly old, 2000, I think it was published, and not enjoying it a lot, I must say. Just not sort of my cup of tea. And when
yeah,
you start reading a book and it's not, sort of grinds a bit.
yeah.
Yeah. But I'm also reading The Name of the Wind, which is my all-time favorite.
Oh,
And
that sounds good.
yeah, so
Yeah,
I'm
I
I'm
think that's on my list. I think it's one of those it's
mhm,
like a title that's been on my list for forever. That the list that never
mhm.
goes down or goes away.
Yeah, no, my TBR list is, well, quite literally hundreds of books. That I don't think I'll ever manage to finish that in my lifetime.
Yeah, I've got a podcast saved on my to listen sort of list eventually. And it's titled. It's sort of a 5-minute podcast that's published every morning, and it's titled "Your 2,500 Books." And I'm really terrified that when I listen to it, it's going to tell me that a person who reads even very prolifically will only ever read 2,500 books, and that you basically have to be selective about which ones they are. And I
Mhm.
don't want that information in my life, so I've decided I'm going to
I
pretend it might
know.
not be that and not listen. But
It is
yeah,
terrible to think that you have limited amount of time, and this was like a recurrent fear that I had. I always used to think, even if I live for like 500 years, I will still have not enough time to read all of the books there are,
yeah.
and it's terrible. I don't
It's
like that thought.
it's pretty much the only compelling reason I could come up with for being immortal. Like, if I was offered the opportunity to be immortal, I've always kind of been of the opinion that it's actually a really rubbish deal and that people who are immortal are generally deeply unhappy because the thing that makes life precious is that it ends, I suppose.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
I also think, but if I was immortal, I probably actually might eventually get through my TBR.
Yeah.
So that's like the one perk I've been able to think of. But I'm very much a mood reader, the same. And I mean, I'm in the
Mm.
ultimate reading slump at the moment because even when I feel like I have the energy to read, I have this tiny human that says, "Nope, you're not going to read now. I've
Yeah, no,
decided that
I
you need
mhm.
to look at me."
Like, no one
So
can blame you. That is the ultimate excuse. Like, you are completely safe.
well, I will say that is one of the things audiobooks I'm similar. I have a
Mhm.
lot of ebooks and physical books that I want to read, but I've noticed that I get to the ones if I get the audiobook version as well. If I do get to read in sort of physical form, that's great, but when I don't and I really want to know what's going to happen in the story, it's a lot easier to have an audiobook in the background and also nicer than just having daytime television on all day because daytime television is awful. It's just terrible,
Yeah.
and kids' cartoons are
Mhm.
worse. Um, so it's good. It's a good medium to sort of help, and it's one that I've been really enjoying at the moment. I'm
Mhm.
doing a buddy read with a fellow podcaster, Marika from Child of the Library. We're reading this Brandon Sanderson Skyward series. We're on the
Oh, of
second book.
course. Sanderson. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I've never
So
read
you're
any
reading
of his.
Starsight, if I'm
Starsight,
correct.
yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I've read it.
Is it good?
It's not my like my most favorite Sanderson series, I have to say. I don't know if it's
Ah.
because Outside the Cosmere, maybe it's just a bit too YA for me, but I
It
don't
is.
know.
It's very YA. I'm really enjoying it to
Hmm.
begin with, but I have never read any other Sanderson, so I feel like I had no
Oh,
expectations going in. So
yeah,
because I've never read
that's
Mistborn
fine.
or any of the ones
Hmm.
that are on my list, but I've just not got round to them. I just I think I ended up reading Skyward because I saw that Marika was planning on starting to read it, and I'd had it on my list forever, and we'd been
Hmm.
talking about doing a buddy read. So we're like, oh, we'll just do this, and then we've been sort of going through it together. She has read Sanderson before. I haven't. It is very YA. I did the audiobook for the first one, had to not use the audiobook for the second one because I don't like the narrator.
Hmm.
And a lot of that has to do with the accent she uses for most of the characters. So for some reason,
Okay.
Spin sounds like the most stereotypical Cockney, like in any Dickens on film adaptation that they have, and they get like
Yeah.
they it's like the little boy that has the really strong London accent. That's what Spin sounds like. Sounds like a little boy
What?
from a
That
Dickens
is
novel. It
super
doesn't
odd.
make any sense.
That
um,
makes no sense.
and Embot is Scottish, which actually I kind of like when Embot is Scottish.
I don't know what
um,
to think about that.
and
Yeah,
Kimmerlin has
okay, maybe.
Yeah, Kimberlin has a really deep Southern accent, which is actually also kind of nice. It kind of goes with her character, but it's just, it's just
Mm,
a lot. And because of how irritating the voice she gives Spin is, and it's all from Spin's perspective, it was too
yeah,
difficult for me to sort of get through that. I was like, I'm not getting the second one. I will and it sounds more childlike because of the way she portrays the voices. It
narration.
feels
Yeah.
like a much younger book. So
Hmm.
yes, I am really enjoying the story generally, but I also I have a real soft spot for sci-fi at the moment, so I think maybe
Hmm.
that could be it. I have just backed Sanderson's Kickstarter on a
Oh,
whim.
that is just the whole. I've been obsessed with Sanderson for a bit. I did like a 30-minute long video on just Sanderson, and the way that he had like, yeah, speechless. Like that. Yeah, I think he really understands um publishing on another level, be it traditional self-publishing. Like he knows
Mm,
how to get a book in front of you, and that's just astounding.
yeah.
But yeah, no, I wish I had. I wish I wasn't a broke student and I could back like the top tier level Kickstarter. Oh,
Oh, yeah,
yeah.
that was my thought. I was looking at it and I was looking at the Year of Sanderson because honestly, I've only read one of his series, but I can already tell
Mm,
that he's like a top quality author that once I really get into it, I'll be hooked. And I was looking at the
you're
swag
gonna have fun.
boxes. Yeah, and I sort of like and once you add in like the postage for to the UK, and I was just like, I've got like bills and a baby. I was like, no, you can't justify it. There's absolutely no way around it. You cannot justify that. So I've had to go lower down the scale, so I just at least get the
Yeah,
stories. But I was just looking at it, I was just like, I could go on holiday abroad for how much money that is going to
it is pricey. Yeah.
yeah, so I was like, it's great though. I mean, apparently it's the most backed Kickstarter in Kickstarter's
Oh,
history.
it's just mad. I last time I checked, it was like 22 million pounds or something like that.
Yeah, it's a
I
lot.
struggle. He like
He could have sold
automatically
them to
has
any publisher.
he automatically has become a $1 million publishing entity on his own. Like he's more like he's going to be one of the big five.
Mm.
Like Penguin Random House is going to be, shaking at at the thought of Sanderson and Kickstarter.
It is
Oh,
really impressive, but I mean, with like some writers like that, I get the idea. I mean, just by the sheer number of books he's published, there are some writers who are just prolific like that in the way that they can just
yeah.
produce them. I read because even though I'm not a writer myself, I follow a lot of people who write on Twitter because I really enjoy sort of seeing the process.
Hmm.
And one of them posted because she's an author who she just writes a lot, and she says some people just write fast. Sometimes once the idea is formed, it just comes out that way. And she says, and some people just don't. It's not about quality, it's not about skill, it's just some people's brains just work like that. And I was like, yeah, I wish I could write, end draft quality things first go. But I mean, my uni assignments, they go through some iterations. I mean, there's a lot of drafts.
Yeah, I think he would be the only
Mhm.
person that is able to do this. And I read a tweet the other day, and it's true. Like the business model of his company, which has 30 people and an HR person, like,
Mhm.
and this is just one
Wow.
author, and the whole of like 30 people and 30 salaries depend on his writing, and that's
Yeah.
just mentally. How do you? I think he would be the only person to do that. Like,
I mean, that's a way to trigger writer's block, if anything, isn't it? Like,
yeah,
yeah. I
it's
mean,
mental.
yeah. Power to him. Good, good
Yeah,
on it.
yeah, like, honestly.
Yeah, I look forward to enjoying the rest of his books. I suppose because I know so many people are such massive fans of him and his
Mm,
series, I'm kind of glad that when people have a favorite series and they wish they could just forget it all and experience it for the first time again, I'm in the unique position where I actually
yeah.
can experience it all. And I had a similar, I want to read Robin Hobb's books
Mhm.
eventually. She's got hundreds of them as well.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, one of those. But that's really good. So you've got a book on the go that's not so big a fan, and a reread of an all-time favorite, which is a great way to get out of a reading slump. I've been rereading Percy Jackson
Yeah.
to tackle
Mm.
mine. So
I'm kind of like, I think I would have loved Percy Jackson maybe 10 years ago. Like, I would have been
yeah.
it would have been one of the my favorites, like, most favorite
Mhm.
series. But the thing is, if I read it now, I haven't read it, but if I read it
Yeah.
now, I know it's not going to be my sort of interest at the moment. So I don't want to ruin that. So I might just,
Yeah.
I don't know,
It
maybe one day.
it is a series that even as an adult I read it and it's just good, it's good clean fun. Like, it's just really
Okay,
fun,
no,
it's
that
really
is good.
readable. But
Okay.
and it hasn't aged badly. It's not aged. There are some aspects of it was
It
written in
was,
the
yeah.
early 2000s, so there are some things that are very much a product of the time, just in terms of
Mhm.
technology sometimes, but also um other ideas. But generally speaking, it's aged really well considering when it was written, and especially better compared to other contemporary series of like of a similar time.
Mhm.
And the reason I'm rereading it is because a podcaster I follow is he's reading it from the beginning for the first time, taking you on the journey, because he did read Harry Potter originally from as an adult, which he'd never read before, and then
Mhm.
he did an entire series on that, but he stopped with all of that now, and he's onto Percy Jackson. And yeah, it was one of my favorites. I read it when it was directed at my
Big,
age.
like, yeah.
Like, I saved up my pocket money to go to
Oh, that's brilliant.
Waterstones and buy the
Yeah.
books.
Oh, it's
So
nostalgia factor there for you.
yeah, and when it came to like the series that came after, I was like pre-ordering them in person at my bookstore and going and getting them on their release, like catching 3 buses to go to my town centre to get them
Oh,
on the
wow.
release day and read them.
Yeah, that's
um,
great. Yeah.
yeah, I actually remember I was on a school trip and we stopped at a service station and I picked up the newest book at WH Smith from that service station because I had to know what was going to happen, and read half of it on the coach on the way there. But anyway, I digress. Rereads are always a good way to get really, yeah.
Yeah,
You can tell I've not spoken to anyone about books in a really, really long time.
it's
I'm
all good.
sorry.
No, no, don't apologize. Never apologize when talking about books.
Okay, well, back to the podcast. The reason we're all here today,
Yes.
um,
Mhm.
for listeners
I've got
who
my list.
awesome. For listeners who don't know, the Books Class podcast is the podcast that challenges book lovers, um, of all varieties, be it reviewers or just readers or anything in between, to pick the only 5 books that they can take with them when cast away forever to a isolated remote location. They can be any 5 books, just the 5 books they couldn't possibly live without and could read over and over and over. As part of this, the guest is also allowed to pick their mystery isolated remote location they can be cast away to, because we do not demand castaways go to desert islands on this podcast. So, in that vein, what would be your mystery remote location?
Right. So lately, I've been listening to a lot of. I listened to the whole of the Outlander soundtrack and the Last of the Mohicans as well. So I'm going to choose the like a remote cottage in the Scottish Highlands. I think that'll be my location. And I know for a fact that at some point in my life, I'm going to do that. I'm going to move up there and just, I don't know, write historical fiction and get a dog and walk the dog, and that's all I'm doing. I just know it.
That sounds like a marvelous choice of location and life. I've went wild camping in the Scottish Highlands in August of 2020 when we were avoiding seeing people, and
It's a
so
good
we went.
idea.
Yeah, we went wild camping away from people. We just took our dog and my husband, and we just did it, and it's gorgeous. I
Yeah.
highly recommend a trip up there. You don't have to wild camp to enjoy it, though. I will say, feel free to, you know, book an Airbnb somewhere with like a bubble bath and that sort of thing. Running water.
Yeah, amenities, modern
That
amenities. Yeah.
that's what really makes a trip, I will say. um, but yes, Scottish Islands is an awesome one. I think it's probably. I feel like God. What is time? Yeah, I feel like we've had past guests who picked Scotland before, and
Mm,
Outlander is a favorite. Two of my very closest friends adore Outlander, and they are
it's great.
begging me to watch slash read it. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Haven't read the books, but the show is really good. I can't speak for the books.
I've been told I'm probably safer watching the show because some of the less savoury parts are not quite as difficult to
Okay,
cope with in the show.
I
Apparently,
see.
that could be an incorrect recommendation, but that is what I've been told.
Interesting.
So okay, without further ado, what is the first book that you're taking with you to your cottage in the Scottish Highlands with your dog?
So it's good that we're talking about Sanderson because my first pick is a Sanderson book. It's The
Ooh.
Way of Kings, the first book in the Stormlight archive. You might have heard of it if you are familiarizing yourself in the Sanderson world. Um, but yeah, I absolutely love this book. I sort of the way I picked it, I'm just realizing now is sort of like in a ranking of like my top 5 books. But anyway, yeah. Um, yeah, that's my first pick.
Excellent. I have been, yes, Stormlight Archive is on the list. See, everything's intentional. This is why we talked about Sanderson earlier. It's all really been really well planned.
Well planned. Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I have been recommended that because I told a friend of mine who was a very big fan of Sanderson that I wanted to read the series, and she said that the in her opinion, having read them all, the Stormlight Archive is better. Um,
That is there's an interesting opinion because in within the Sanderson sphere and the book community, everyone recommends Mistborn first,
yeah.
and I always recommend Mistborn first because The Way of Kings. Let me just tell you, it has 3 prologues, and the first, let's say, 20 pages, you think the story starts, and
Mm.
then it's 4,000 years later. So
That's a jump.
that's not a spoiler. Yeah,
No, no.
thing it's sort of it's dense. It's the densest, the most
Yeah,
epic a fantasy can get. So I would recommend Mistborn. But you know what? If you're familiar with epic fantasy,
yeah.
go for it. Like
I have managed 4 of the 5 Game of Thrones books that have been published. I mean, I don't
I
know if
think
I've got the
you'll
mental.
be safe.
I don't think I've got the mental capacity to dive straight back into that. I might have to warm up for it first. Like it's
Yeah.
been a while. But yeah, to be honest, I tend to my I've completely made up, and people are free to disagree with me. But if it happens in the first 50 pages, or maybe like the first like I don't know 10% of the book, I don't think it counts as a spoiler because it's basically story setup. So
I agree with that. Actually, I do agree with that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those. It's like if you're describing Gone Girl, you wouldn't like not tell people that she goes missing because that's like the whole point of the story.
It's in the title, people. It's called
Yes.
Gone Girl. Like,
Exactly. But it's
yeah,
one of those, it's just like, yeah, I think if it happens in like story setup, it doesn't count.
yeah. I
But
agree.
yeah,
I
so
have to
The
agree.
Way of Kings, why you say obviously Mistborn sort of gets recommended slightly more. Why The Way of Kings for your absolute sort of favourites out of that sort of world?
From a pragmatic point of view, it's massive. It's like 1,200 pages, so I've got more content to enjoy in my remote
A
location.
very common reason I've found. The longest books people can fit
Yeah.
in tend to make it.
It's also it's really good. The way that Sanderson does it is it's like 5 or 6 stories in one, and how they interconnect with each other. So I think, um, yeah, it's great the way that you get more than just one narrative. It's like getting 6 books in one. So that's probably one of the reasons why I picked it.
Mm. I do like the sort of multiple narrative kind of view as well,
Hmm.
because I can read books in one perspective, like say Skyward and
Yeah.
Seaweeds, for instance. I enjoy it all from, I suppose, the one perspective because it gives you, I suppose, a real start to finish with very little dramatic irony, I suppose. But at the same
Hmm.
time, I'm dying to get inside the other characters' heads and know what they're actually
Yeah.
thinking. So, yeah, I tend to prefer a multiple narrative if it's available. Um,
Hmm.
would you say fantasy is a overarching theme for your 5 books, or have you jumped around genre wise?
Oh, interesting question. 4 out of the 5 are fantasy, and one is science fiction. I'm a sci-fi fantasy kind of guy.
Yeah, same. I feel like I still have yet to make my list because I am a hypocrite and I like making other people make difficult decisions that I don't have to make. Um, but I also probably would lean heavily towards fantasy because that is what like 90% of my books are usually.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
do try, but I mean, I just can't get into thrillers. I don't. I just they're just not my bag.
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
Okay, so The Way of Kings, Brandon Sanderson, first one in a series. Always risky because you've always got a bit of a cliffhanger. But where's the second book you'll be taking with you to Scotland?
So the second book, and I chose this one entirely out of the nostalgia factor. Again, we planned this talking about Percy Jackson. Like everything is, this is scripted basically.
Basically, we
Um,
planned it.
yeah, exactly. It's Eragon by Christopher Paolini.
Ooh.
Have you heard of it?
I have because I seem to recall he was a very, very young gentleman when he wrote the books. It was lauded as very impressive that he had been able to write such, I suppose,
Hmm.
sophisticated fiction for, I mean, was I think he was a
17.
teenage
He was
17. I was like
17
for
years
some
old
reason
when he
like
published it. Yeah.
19 was in my head, but yeah, 17 is short. And I know he's recently published a new book
Hmm. Yeah,
that
he's published "To Sleep in a Sea of Stars," which is a very poetic
yes.
title. But yeah, no, Eragon, and I think it really resonated with me. This is something that Sanderson has said as well. People say that it is a bit of a copy from things like works from Anne McCaffrey, and it's like a
Mm.
remix of Star Wars, and it
Lord
really
of the
reads
Rings
like
I've also heard as well,
that
yeah.
as
But
well. Yeah, it's very sort of trope in that sense. But the thing is, I hadn't been in contact with any of those things. So
mm,
Aragon is Lord of the Rings for some people, or um what was the other things that I mentioned that I completely
yeah.
blanked on. But
I,
yeah, that's the thing. Like it's remixes, but it's how you are introduced to fantasy, and
yeah.
I was introduced to fantasy through Aragon.
None of the stories, there are no new stories. I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know where this is from, but it's like there's only 7 stories in the entire world, and every story that you've ever read is a version of one of those seven
Yeah,
stories.
yeah,
Yeah, I always find it really interesting when people, I suppose, try to diminish a book by saying it's essentially a, X, Y, or Z copy of some other book, because I mean, we all grew up on um the current generation are growing up on Frozen, which is basically just the plot of The Lion King, which is basically just the
yeah.
plot of Hamlet. So, so I mean,
Exactly,
I just
exactly.
none of it's original. It's all just different characters and different names. Really, it's whatever you find, and every fantasy novel could be someone's first fantasy novel. So
I
why?
fully agree. I fully agree. Like even when people say, "Oh, it's a copy of Star Wars," well, Star Wars is really Dune, and Dune is really Foundation from Asimov, and you can go back and find
Yeah,
iterations. So yeah,
yeah. At its bare
it's
bones,
just the book that you pick up.
Yeah, and at its bare bones, someone in the medieval times has written that story basically, and it just
Oh,
just never
100%.
made it
Yeah.
to the surface.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can't say it's a series that I've ever read because I've still not been brave enough to pick up Lord of the Rings, to be honest.
Me neither, actually. And
But
I'm scared to admit this to people because they'll lynch me. Fantasy book tuber that hasn't read Lord of the Rings. How dare you?
I
But
know, but
yeah, I
everyone
haven't.
just tells you
I've
it's
got
all
it, but
walking.
yeah,
And it just makes me scared because the only thing worse than having not read Lord of the Rings is having read it and not liked it.
yeah.
So, I feel like it's kind of better to be in ignorance. But what but so you say there's a sort of nostalgia factor. Did you read them when you were quite young, the Eragon series?
Yeah, I think it was I was either 13 or 14 at the time. And back then it was sort of when I started like dabbling into writing. So I remember my dad went into the bookstore and he said, "Look, my son is, well, this geek, this nerd that likes fantasy and likes writing fantasy." And they said, "Well, you just get this."
Yeah,
And he says it was, yeah, that just here,
take the
give
books,
this
take
book,
them.
yeah. And it was sort of like I remember reading the bio and thinking, this is my life. Who is this dude from, I don't know, Montana living my life? So yeah, I must have been 13 or 14 at the
Yeah.
time, I think. And I devoured I think I read the whole series in maybe 3 weeks, and then I had to wait a couple years for the last book, and it was the worst thing.
Agony, agony.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I always like my absolute favorite. Now, the parent that I want to be, my absolute favorite parents are the parents that go into bookstores and say, "Please, I have no idea what my child should read. Tell me what my
Yeah.
child should read." Because I just feel like, you know what? Even if they're not big readers themselves, at least they're trying. I was not a child who was encouraged in my reading habits because there aren't very many readers in my family. And I actually had a similar experience today. I was in this big, busy secondhand bookstores, the kind with the books piled all the way up to the ceiling and you can't move for just stacks of them everywhere. And
Mhm.
a gentleman and his daughter were at the counter, and she had this huge book, and it was something to do. It was like a really old sort of early 1900s guides to women's etiquette and how they should sort of behave, and also all sorts
Mhm.
of weird stuff like cooking and cuts of meat and that sort of thing, things that women apparently in the early
Yeah.
1900s should know.
Womanly pursuits.
Exactly, but she had picked this
Yeah.
book from like a purely sort of academic point of view, and they picked it
Yeah.
up, and the guy, she had this whole stack of books, and the woman behind the counter was going through them to get the prices, because they usually write them in pencil, don't they, in the inside page. And she
Yeah.
said, "Oh, this one's. Did you see the price on this one?" She said to her dad. She was just like, "This one's £60." And he looked at his daughter. He was just like, "You are going to read it, aren't you?" And she was like, "Yeah." So he said, "Okay, fine, she can have it." And he bought this huge stack of books for his daughter. And I kind of looked at her. I was like, "Oh my god, is that?" Because I didn't know it was her dad at the time. I was like, "Is that your dad?" And she
Mm.
said, "Yeah." And I was like, "Oh, you're so lucky." Oh man, I was just like, "I wish." As how I wish. um, but it was just the most. It properly made my day, because I was just like, "Oh, amazing parents that buy books for their kids are the best kinds of." Obviously, only if their kids really enjoy reading. If children
Yeah.
don't enjoy reading, they should not be forced to do it. That's what makes children hate reading.
Yeah. That's
But
true.
yeah, always good when a parent sort of, I suppose, hits the nail on the head with a book series for you.
Yeah.
And it's got such a distinctive set of covers as well. I can picture them, even having never read them. I can picture them in my head.
Yeah, and he did. He made them.
Oh,
Like
really?
he drew them. He did not the ones. I don't know if you've like. There's different
Mm,
editions, but he actually self-published back in the day
mm.
before Amazon, and he had to go around schools selling his book, and he
Oh,
had done that cover, and the map inside he drew as well. Um, he's, yeah, very talented.
wow. I mean,
Yeah. And 17 he was, like 17.
I mean,
When I was
it's
17, I don't know what I was doing, probably playing
I
computer
I know
games.
exactly what I was doing at 17. I think I was dropping out of sixth form when I was 17. I was saying, you know what, I can't be bothered with maths anymore.
Yeah, I hate maths, so
Yeah.
yeah, I feel you.
Yeah, I'm not.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, great. Lots of really, really inspirational authors on this list. There's a lot of
Yeah.
underlying inspiration as well as great
Yeah.
stories. Nice ones to have about. So, okay, two fantasy heavyweights there. What's the third book that will be joining?
So the third book is actually a Spanish series. I don't know if you know, but I'm originally from Spain, and I got this was again a gift from my parents. Like you were saying, I was lucky in the sense that my parents sort of just, you want to read? But here, have 20 books. Just go and read. um, and this one, they were loving life because I was occupied for a while because it was an 8 book long series, and they were like, yeah, just we got the next 2 months covered. Um, and it's called The Key of Time, and it's science fiction by two authors that you will not know them. They're Spanish authors and fairly obscure. They're called Ana Alonso and Javier Pelegrín. They co-authored the series. But and I really like it. It's like one of those foundational books for me. So yeah, that's my third pick, The Key of Time.
Excellent. And I mean, I suppose I kind of presumed with how well known the series were with Way of Kings and Aragon that's most people sort of know what they're about, mainly sort of dragons and fighting and medieval stuff, really.
Yeah,
But The
yeah.
Key of Time, I mean, it's sci-fi. What sort of roughly is that about? If someone wanted to go and check them out and boost some obscure writers
Absolutely,
a
yeah.
little
I
bit.
do recommend go and buy. I'm representing Spanish talent here, but yeah, the series is about four teenagers, and the year is 2100 and something, so it's 100 years in the future. It's not a secondary world, so it's in our it's on Earth, and basically the world is ruled by 9 corporations, so 9 companies, and the story basically centers around Martin, which is from Madrid in 2021-12, I think the year was. And he's picked up by one of those corporations, and that corporation is specializing in pharmaceuticals. And basically, this corporation gathers all of these teenagers with a very special immune system. Um, and the reason why they've got a really special immune system is because they're time travelers and they don't know they're time travelers. So they've been engineered in the future to come to the past, which is our future, to do things I won't reveal. But yeah, that's it. It's 8 books. It's very long. Um, it's sort of, I would describe it as space opera a little bit, like Star Wars. Like there's planets and travels and time traveling, and it's just right up my alley.
That sounds amazing. I mean, I love a bit of
Yeah.
time travel. It sounds really good. And when you said the world's sort of ruled by 9 corporations, I was like, wow. We're only what 70,
Well,
75 years away from.
we're
we,
halfway there. We've got Apple and Amazon. We just need a couple more.
I was just thinking, what are the? I was like, well, Disney owns quite a bit,
Yeah.
Amazon, Google, and I suppose
Yeah, we're
Apple
nearly
and
there.
yeah. So as people are fighting it out. I'm sure there's some companies that I've never even heard of that own even more than those companies. I don't want
Yeah.
to know. I mean, yeah, but yeah, we're not
It
too
is
far
scary
back.
to think that everything is controlled by maybe 4 or 5 really powerful
Oh
people.
yeah, Facebook's definitely trying to get Meta
Meta,
now.
yeah.
It's
Mm.
always going to be Facebook. It's like Google
Yeah.
tried to be Alphabet. It's always going to be Facebook.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but yes, so yeah, The Key of Time. I mean, that's really great. Is it the first book in the series that you'd want to take with you?
So no, the first book actually, yeah, true. No, the first book is called the Island and the Tower, um, and that's the name of the first book. The Key of Time is the whole series. So I
Oh,
would take the first one probably.
fair enough. I
Yeah.
It's quite interesting with it being a sci-fi, with it being science fiction, sort of space opera. They're actually quite the Key of Time and um, was it the Tower
On the island.
and the
It
Island?
sounds very fantastical
Yeah,
titles.
I
That's
was just
true.
thinking
Yeah,
it sounds like very sort of high fantasy titles. It's quite interesting that it's like a space novel, really, because yeah, they're very sort of classic fantasy. But I like the sound of that. Sounds really interesting. I might have to have a look.
I'd
See if I
recommend it.
can
Yeah,
find.
it's
Yes,
interesting.
yes. I'm
I think it's been translated. I'm sure it's been translated, so there'll be English copies.
excellent. I will try and have a look. It's a lifetime goal of mine that I will read a book in a foreign language. But I tried to learn Spanish at school, and um, I mean, I took to German slightly easier, and I think it's because the sounds are
Oh,
closer to English
yeah,
sounds.
that is true.
Um,
Yeah, etymologically, yeah.
my voice is not lyrical enough to master Spanish and French. None of the words sound correct. I couldn't. I'm just like, no, my voice. I'm just too clunky for such beautiful sounding languages. I'm not even gonna. I've got no excuse.
I have to say I'm glad that I like my mother tongue is Spanish and I learned English. I would say knowing both, I think
Mm.
English is easier than Spanish. Especially when it comes to verbs. That there's so many tenses in Spanish. There's like 20. It's ridiculous. Um, so I can't. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I think
it's a
I
struggle.
I think the reason I like German was because it's so formulaic, especially with the way sentences are structured. It's like, right, okay, so the verb goes here. It always goes here in the sentence.
Yeah,
Um,
it's very
and
German. How German is.
yeah, so I think that's probably why I kind of liked it because I was just like, yes, it doesn't have to sound. Yeah, I was just awful. To be fair, I was never particularly good at languages at school, but I think that is more of a failure of the British education system than my own
Mm,
personal failure. They start us too late. It's our brains are already too hard by the time they
yeah.
try and teach us. It's
Yeah, it's the thing. You
awful.
speak English, and everyone speaks English, so sort of can be like for convenience. You don't really put a lot of effort into it.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things. I think if we were taught earlier, as in like in a lot of European countries, because I did a French exchange, and they teach foreign language so early, and they like English from such a young age. That's why they've got like there's. I mean, of course, there's like a. It's just easier when you're younger,
Hmm.
and I just feel like if they actually sort of taught us. I mean, French, German, Spanish, they are fairly close languages to us geographically. There's no reason why
Yeah,
we shouldn't learn them
yeah,
from the age of like 3, like
mm,
every other country in
yeah.
the world. But yeah, I will. I'll get on the phone to our education secretary now that whoever that is these days. Honestly, who knows?
I don't know.
Um,
It's been a while since I've watched the news.
yeah, that's a good shout. I've tried to. I think yeah, it's it's a
It's fairly
lot.
depressing at the time. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay. So another sorry, yeah, tangents. Sorry.
No, no. I go on tangents all the time.
Okay, so we've got our fantasy picks, we've got the sci-fi pick that we were promised. What is the second to last fantasy novel that you'll be taking with you with your dog, which I know is hypothetical, but I'm trying to picture a breed and name even though it
um.
doesn't exist.
So breed, I'm guessing it will probably be either a Labrador or a Golden Retriever. I
Very,
think
very good
those
choices.
two. Yeah. Name, I don't know. Probably a cutesy. I've I like we've got a dog back home, and I wanted to name him Titan, because it sounds like I don't know, epic
Cool. It's
and
a cool name.
just cool. But then when we got the hit, like we got him, and we sort of looked at each other and we were like, "This is he's not Titan. He's so goofy. Like he's dumb. He's not a Titan." So yeah, he's called Bowie because he's got two, like
Oh.
it's got heterochromia. It's got one blue eye and one brown eye. So yeah, Bowie.
Oh wow, Bowie's a great name for a dog. We have a dog called Monty, and he is also
Oh.
a bit of a goof. He's the kind of dog that falls off furniture and then looks around to see if anyone
What
noticed.
happened?
He's yeah, he's just like, oh, did they see that? And he turns around slowly and makes eye contact with you and goes, oh yeah, they saw that. That's really
Yeah.
embarrassing. It's it's he's a strange dog. But yes, okay, so
Yes. So
um
the fourth pick, it would be The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie.
ooh, another speaking of titans, another
Mm,
titan of
mm.
fantasy. Um okay, yeah, another one. Honestly, I say I say I'm a fantasy fan, but this is another one that I have not read. But I have seen everywhere. So, why the blade itself? I mean, I suppose it must definitely live up to the hype. I mean, everyone I know who's read it
Oof.
enjoys it.
It's, for me, the best character work in like out there that I've read. The way that he writes character is just incredible. Um, I've got a friend that described The Blade Itself sort of like a Tarantino-esque book where nothing happens and you're just seeing characters talking to each other, but you love it. Like you just cannot stop listening to or reading them. Um, and that is The Blade Itself. I love it as well because it's sort of like a satire of fantasy. It's really laughing at fantasy because it's full of jokes, full of hidden references, full of digs at the typical, the stereotypical tropey
Yeah,
fantasy. Um, oh, it's great, honestly great.
that I mean, I've never actually heard it described like that, and when you describe it like that, it actually makes me really want to read it a lot sooner
Mm,
than I sort of probably would have got to. Because in my head, it was a very very serious just fantasy like I suppose fantasy, and I hate to say fantasy like any other sort of fantasy. It was one of those that I was in my head because of the way it looks. It's got the image down so well, it blends in so well with the rest of the fantasy novels in the fantasy section of the bookstore, that in
mhm.
my head it was kind of like, oh well, I mean, if I'm gonna read something that's basically just like, I don't know, Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings, I may as well just read something that's Game of Thrones or Lord of the
Yeah.
Rings.
I'd
um
say give it a chance because it really isn't like that.
yeah,
I would say it's more similar to Game of Thrones, but it's different.
yeah.
Game of Thrones is not, it's fantasy, but there isn't any satire to it, and
Yes,
this has it.
it is
This,
serious
yeah,
sprawling fantasy as opposed to
yeah,
I do love satire in all of its forms. I was a very peculiar child in that when I studied history at school, I really, really, really enjoyed taking apart the political cartoons that they do to sort of
hmm
go back to thinking I really enjoy political cartoons, even if I don't agree with the image of them, because I just think they're so genius. The satire of them is just amazing.
yeah, and
And
it's
so
great that it really shows what the people thought at the time.
yeah.
Like you see a political cartoon from the 1800s, and you think, oh wow, this is what people were worrying about.
Yeah, it's really awesome stuff. So yeah, I did not know that about the blade itself. It's always shelved near one of my favorite authors, Scott Lynch, because of his Gentleman
Hmm
Bastard sequence, which is like my all-time favorite fantasy series, and it's always shelved near it. And the Waterstones have done special editions of the blade itself books that are in the same style as the ones that they did for Scott Lynch's, which makes me think that it must at least be of of equal
Yeah.
excellence, I suppose. To
I think
I
they
mean,
even were published very close together, and they've got like a bit of a running beef, sort of, but not fake beef.
yeah,
Like those
yeah.
two.
Yeah,
Um,
maybe. I mean, from the looks of it, Joe Abercrombie is actually still publishing his book, whereas Scott Lynch has just
yeah, it's
decided
been a
that he's going to
while.
make us wait forever. I'm worried I'm going to be shuffled off this mortal coil by the time that Scott Lynch decides to publish the next book in his series. But yeah, The Blade itself by Joe Abercrombie is yet another. I mean, this is really like the absolute ultimate, if you want to get into fantasy list, these are the books you should read
At
sort
least
of
from,
list.
if you want to have high steam in my eyes, that this is how you start.
Yeah. You mentioned Quentin Tarantino is slight off piece, but Quentin Tarantino is not a filmmaker I kind of got into until very recently, and I would got into is probably maybe laying it on a bit thick, but I do think his films are really, really clever. Out of
Mhm.
curiosity, what is your favorite of his films, if you do have one? Because is it okay for
I'm
people
pointing for
listening?
yeah. For people listening, I'm pointing to a Pulp Fiction poster, the massive poster I've got here on the on my wall. Yeah, that is my favorite of his.
Yeah, categorically the first thing I spied when we first came onto the cameras to record. Yeah, Pulp Fiction was probably the first one I saw of his. Because
Mhm.
I hadn't seen it even when I was of an age that I really should have seen it. Um, but yeah, just in case someone out there was trying to measure whether they wanted to try the blade itself and they wanted to sort of do a quick, litmus test on whether their taste aligns with your taste. There you go. You've got one there.
Yeah. Yeah,
um,
exactly. And I would say that it's not the one criticism I find for Tarantino movies is sometimes the dialogue is a bit repetitive, and it's like, well, Tarantino, we got it. Like, we yeah, I know what you're talking about. Like, move on. Abercrombie doesn't have that. Like, Abercrombie is very like sharp and brevity is the soul of wit, and he hits that mark very well.
Definitely good to know on a comparison point. Okay, so we've reached the fifth and final book. What is the last book you will be taking with you to your cottage?
The last book is one I've mentioned already because it's my all-time favorite. Is The Name of the Wind. Um, this book is this is perfection. This is I know it's got detractors, but I find it incredible.
My head is saying Patrick Rothfuss. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, I'm so happy that I remembered that.
Yeah. Yeah, he I would say he's the exact opposite to Sanderson. He writes one book and then revises it for 15 years obsessively, and then the result is just one book, but it's just polished diamond, and it's just beautiful.
Oh, amazing. So, what's the name of the wind about? Just for anyone who may not
Yeah.
know, because it might be one of those books that, I mean, I've heard of a lot of sort of
Mhm.
classics, excellent books, but I could not tell you they're about to save my life.
So the name of the wind, it has an interesting structure, in the sense that it is told as a series of flashbacks. So it tells the story of Kvothe, which is this mythical sort of figure that has garnered a very fame very quickly, and one day someone comes to a place that he's staying, and he sort of pries the story out of him, and it narrates the stories through his eyes of how he became the legend of Kvothe. And it's just beautifully written. I don't it's so lyrical, it's so poetic, and e- every word is calculated and measured against all the words. So yeah.
Amazing. Well, yeah, I mean, it's definitely one that's heralded. So I imagine if it was on someone's TBR to hear you talk so highly of it would definitely maybe push it up. I always find that with the lists, when you
Mhm.
hear someone talk about a book that they, even if it's a book you've heard of a million times before, as it so often is when I'm talking to people about books, it's a book I've heard of a million times, I've seen it on Twitter 100 times. But when you talk
Mhm.
to someone who loves it as much as as some people love their favorite books, it just makes you want to grab it, even if it's a book you've never heard of. It's amazing and
Mm.
not good for my
For your
TBR on
TBR.
TBR on my bank account. But here we are. Okay, so I mean, it's an amazing list for anybody who was maybe listening along and wants, I don't know, a shopping list to take with them to a bookstore. Maybe even for their teenage children who love fantasy.
Yeah, definitely.
um,
They will love you.
what are the five books that you have picked?
So I've picked The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, Eragon by Christopher Paolini, The Key of Time by, well, actually, The Tower and the Island from the Key of Time series by Alonso and Javier Pelegrín, The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie, and The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss.
Excellent. And I mean, that is a really high caliber list. Were there any books that you really wanted to squeeze on there, but they just couldn't couldn't quite beat out those five?
I would honestly put more Sanderson books in there because they're amazing. I would put Mistborn in there. Yeah, I think that was probably the one I was thinking. Mistborn. So the first book of Mistborn, the Final Empire. I don't know. I would probably put the. I've just like it popped in my head now, and I can't believe I didn't put it here. The Chronicles of Narnia. I grew up with the Chronicles of Narnia, so definitely in there.
Yeah, Narnia was one that passed me by when I was quite young because
Mm,
I never watched the. I suppose I never watched the film, which might have been a lot of people's gateway into it, possibly.
hmm
And they weren't books that were ever bought for me, so it was one of those that kind of missed me, as well as sort of like the Spiderwick Chronicles and a series of unfortunate events. They were sort of books that I kind of saw a lot of people my age reading, but never actually ended up
hmm
landing in my hands.
hmm
Always makes me wonder, especially with books that hit you at such a formative age, how it might have changed my reading tastes and patterns if I had have like read these series. But the
hmm
Chronicles of Narnia is yeah, another massive one. I do find people who come with the list, either they have their list and that's their list, and they you know what, there's other books that they like, but this is their list. Like there was no ifs, ahs, and buts about it. This
hmm
was what was going on it. And then there's other people who who have their five list, and then they have a list of about 50 books that were like this close to making it on the
Yeah,
list. It's always good to see to find it is literally one or the
yeah,
other. There's no in between.
yeah. I've got a very solid idea that yeah, at least three of them I will always consider my one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, they are, I mean, amazing book recommendations, especially for fantasy. It's been a while since we've had like a purely sort of solid fantasy talk on there
Oh, interesting.
because you always tend to find either there's like a genre sort of bias in the list, or they're all over the place, and it's and it's always really interesting to see. But it has been a while since we've had some really big fantasy hard hitters, so a really nice change of pace. If people listening wanted to find more book recommendations from you, where might they find you? And you also have your own book in the pipeline, which you're more than welcome to talk about
Yes.
because I would like to know what it's about.
Oh, sure, yeah. So if you want to find me, I am just put like type up my name anywhere, and I'll be there. So Pablo Suarez. I'm on Twitter. I'm fairly active on Twitter, and that is a euphemism for very annoying.
I love
Constantly
you on
tweeting.
Twitter. That's where I found you on Twitter.
Oh, great. um, yeah, I'm just saying random things. It's like my safe space for my scattered thoughts. Yeah, so Twitter. It's been a while since I've posted on Instagram, but you can find me there as well, I think, and YouTube. Those are the main sort of places, and you can just pablosuarez.co.uk, and that's my website.
Excellent. And if you would like to talk about it, you're more than
Oh,
welcome,
the book, yes.
or we can,
No, no,
if you
no.
would like
But
to keep
yeah,
it a
I can.
secret.
No, no, I'm fairly close to the publishing. I've talked about it a couple of times. Well, when I say a couple, all the time. Lately on my YouTube, it's basically a book I wrote for my one of my modules last year, and it sort of began as an idea, like a very short novella, and it morphed and. Well, you know, Tolkien said the story grew with the telling, and it really he was spot on. It just carried on growing and growing. And it's just the story of two main characters, Damira and Nim, and Damira on her side of the story basically is a very old, renowned, prestigious doctor that has a shady political past, and that past sort of catches up with her, and then she's got to do things that are a bit unsavory, and they've got very like grave consequences. And then on the other side, we've got Nim, which is a roamer, so a traveler, someone that goes around collecting incantations, which is sort of like the magic system of this world. And he also is studying medicine. So it's got medical themes because that's sort of what I do. um, and then we sort of see some some crossing of the paths of these two characters. So that is it. Yeah, basically the elevator pitch would be Avatar: The Last Airbender meets Grey's Anatomy. I'd say it's probably a safe bet.
Now, yeah, that's I was intrigued anyway, but that is an intriguing combination. I tend to I yeah, Avatar. How would that? Yeah, okay.
It's a bit
I
of a
very
weird
much
combo, but yeah, it's
it is
sort
a
of
combo
elemental
I've not
magic
heard
and
before.
medicine.
It is a combo I've not heard before, but that is a nice. That's always nice when that happens because yeah, I don't think I've ever read that book. So we were talking about stories repeating themselves. I don't think I know that one. So that's amazing. Well, if people go and follow you on all those places that you just shared, you can follow the progress of the book, and you'll know where to get it, and we'll be able
Hmm.
to read it when it joins us Earthside in the published realm.
Yes.
So yeah, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for talking about your awesome list with me and about everything else in between and putting up with my crazy tangents. Um, if
It's been great. Thank you so much.
honestly, the pleasure is all mine. If listeners want to follow the podcast, you can subscribe wherever you've managed to find the podcast that you're listening to right now. And we are on Twitter and Instagram at Books to Last Pod. If you want to go and see over there as well. So yeah, thank you so much, Pablo, for joining me on my first sort of episode back
Hmm.
recording. It's been a really great way to start back in again. And yeah, I'm just so grateful for you and for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been great. It's been a pleasure to talk books, fantasy, and science fiction with you.
Awesome. Okay, so yes, Pablo, thank you for joining. Listeners, thank you for listening. And until next time, bye for now.
Bye.